Amelia Rose Bennett set her worn leather suitcase down on the bride platform for the 10th time, and every mouth in Silver Creek stopped moving. "Go home, Amelia," a man hollered from the crowd. "9 men already said no. You want to make it 10? She lifted her chin and answered loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Then I'll stand here until one of them says yes." Somebody laughed. Somebody else spat in the dirt. And not one soul in that town knew that in 4 hours, the richest man in Montana would walk past every woman on that platform to stop in front of her. Before we go on, please subscribe to the channel. Stay with me all the way to the end of this story, and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has traveled. Amelia Rose Bennett woke up before the sun. She always did. Not because she was eager, not because she was hopeful, because hope was a luxury she stopped affording a long time ago. She sat on the edge of a narrow bed in a rented room above the general store in Silver Creek, Montana. Her hands were rough. Her back ached from years of work that most men in this territory would have quit long before she did. She was 29 years old, and in Silver Creek 29 meant one thing for an unmarried woman. Too late. She reached under the bed and pulled out a worn leather suitcase. The buckle was broken, the leather was cracked, but it held everything she owned: 2 dresses, a pair of work gloves, a small Bible her mother gave her before she died, and a folded piece of paper. The paper was a list. 9 names. 9 men who had stood in front of her on that platform, looked at her, and walked away. She unfolded it slowly. Her fingers traced each name the way a person touches an old wound, not to feel the pain again, but to remind themselves they survived it. She folded the paper back, tucked it deep into the suitcase. Then she stood up and said the same words she said every time. One more time. The bride platform sat in the center of Silver Creek, like a scar the town refused to cover. Every month, unmarried men from surrounding counties rode in looking for wives. They lined up on one side. The women lined up on the other. It was simple. It was brutal. And it was the only chance a woman like Amelia had. She had no family left, no land, no dowry, no father to arrange a match. All she had was herself. And 9 times that had not been enough. She walked through the town slowly. People noticed her immediately. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was remarkable to look at, because they recognized her. "Lord, there she goes again," said Margaret Hollis, standing outside the dry goods store with her arms crossed. Margaret was 52, married for 30 years, and had opinions about everything. "That girl doesn't know when to stop," Margaret said to the woman beside her. "Maybe she just doesn't have anywhere else to go," her companion replied. Margaret shook her head. "Doesn't matter. After 9 times, even a mule learns the fence isn't moving." Amelia heard them. She always heard them. But she had stopped letting the words reach the part of her that still believed. She kept walking. The platform was already crowded when she arrived. 12 women stood in a line, most of them younger than 22. Fresh faces, soft hands, eyes still full of the kind of hope that hadn't been tested yet. Amelia took her place at the far end of the line. She didn't push to the front. She didn't try to stand out. She had learned a long time ago that standing out only gave people more reason to look away. A young woman beside her glanced over. She couldn't have been more than 19, blonde hair, nervous smile fingers fidgeting with the ribbon on her dress. "Is this your first time?" Amelia asked her quietly. The girl nodded. "My pa said I should come. Said there's good men here." Amelia looked at her for a long moment. "There might be." Is it yours? Your first time?" Amelia almost smiled. "No." "How many times have you?" "Enough." The girl went quiet. Then she whispered, "Aren't you scared?" Amelia looked straight ahead at the gathering crowd. Every single time. The first man arrived just before noon. His name was Douglas Parnell. Cattle driver. 36 years old. Thick hands. A face that looked like it had been shaped by too many winters. He walked down the line slowly, the way a man walks through a market picking fruit. He stopped at the younger women. asked their names, smiled at their answers. When he reached Amelia, he paused. "How old are you?" 29. The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Douglas tilted his head. Not mean, not cruel, just calculating. 29, he repeated, as if the number itself was a verdict. That's right. He looked at her hands. Rough, calloused. The hands of a woman who had done real work. You've been out here before, haven't you? I have. How many times? Amelia met his eyes. Does it matter? Douglas Parnell looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then he tipped his hat, turned around, and walked back to a 21-year-old named Sarah, who laughed at everything he said. Amelia watched him go. She did not flinch. She had practiced not flinching for a long time. The second man was worse. His name was Thomas Greer. He was a farmer from the valley, 40 years old. Needed a wife because his first one had died in childbirth, and he had 3 children under the age of 7. He didn't walk the line. He went straight to Amelia. I heard about you, he said. Amelia's jaw tightened. What did you hear? That you're hard-working, that you can manage land, that you don't complain. For a moment, just a brief, dangerous moment. Amelia felt something rise in her chest. Something she had tried to bury. Hope. That's true, she said carefully. Thomas nodded. Good. I need someone who can work. My children need feeding. My farm needs tending. My house hasn't been clean in 2 years. Amelia studied his face. And what would I be to you? A wife or a servant? Thomas blinked. Excuse me, you listed everything you need done. You didn't mention anything about partnership, about respect, about standing beside someone. Thomas Greer's face hardened. Miss Bennett, I'm offering you a real chance. Most men won't even talk to you. I'm standing here giving you an opportunity. An opportunity to do what replace a woman you lost with someone you can use. Thomas stepped back. His voice dropped. You know your problem, Miss Bennett. You're too independent. A man doesn't want a woman who questions everything. A man wants a woman who follows. Amelia felt the old familiar sting, but she held her ground. Then I hope you find her. Thomas Greer walked away and chose a 20-year-old named Clara, who hadn't said a single word the entire morning. The girl beside Amelia, the blonde 19-year-old, looked at her with wide eyes. Why did you do that? She whispered. He was offering me a cage, Amelia said quietly. A comfortable cage is still a cage. The third man didn't even speak to her. He walked the line. He reached Amelia. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds, then kept walking, as if she were an empty chair. The fourth man stopped. He asked her name. When she told him, his expression shifted. Bennett. You're the one whose farm went under? Yes. He shook his head slowly. I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't mean any disrespect, but hardship follows some people. I can't afford to bring that into my life. Amelia's voice was steady. Hardship didn't follow me. It found me. There's a difference. But the man was already walking away. By mid-afternoon, the 5th and 6th men had come and gone. The 5th was a quiet man who seemed genuinely kind. He spoke to Amelia for almost 10 minutes. He asked about her life. He listened to her answers. He even nodded when she described how she had managed her family's farm alone for 3 years after her father died. Then he said, You seem like a remarkable woman, Miss Bennett. Amelia waited. But I'm looking for someone who hasn't been through so much. Someone lighter. Someone who still sees the world as a good place. Amelia felt that one deeper than the others. Because he wasn't being cruel. He was being honest. And honest rejection cuts the deepest. The 6th man chose another woman because Amelia was, in his words, too serious. I need laughter in my home, he said. You look like you haven't laughed in years. Amelia wanted to tell him that laughter doesn't disappear because a person is broken. It disappears because no one gives them a reason to use it. But she said nothing. She just watched him leave. The seventh man was the one who almost broke her. His name was Hank Morrison. He was 51 years old, weathered face, strong build, a man who had clearly survived his own share of hard seasons. He walked straight to Amelia. He looked at her with something she hadn't seen from any of the others. Recognition. "You've been through it," he said, not as a question. "I have. I can see it. In your hands, in your eyes, in the way you stand like you're ready for the next hit before it even comes." Amelia said nothing, but her throat tightened. Hank Morrison studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "A woman who has lived through too much becomes difficult, Miss Bennet." "Difficult how?" "Difficult to reach, difficult to soften, difficult to live beside without feeling like you're constantly being measured." "I don't measure people," Amelia said. "Maybe not, but your eyes do. You're looking at me right now, and you're already deciding whether I'm worth the risk." Amelia held his gaze. "Aren't you doing the same thing?" Hank Morrison smiled sadly. "I suppose I am." He reached out and touched the brim of his hat. "I wish you well, Miss Bennet. I truly do." Then he chose a woman who had never lost anything, a woman whose biggest worry was whether her dress was pressed. And Amelia stood there watching him walk away, and for the first time in 9 months she felt the crack widen. Not break, not yet, but widen. The eighth man was simple. "I want someone younger," he said. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He said it the way someone orders a meal without thinking about the feelings of the food. Amelia didn't respond. She had no energy left for men who saw age as a disqualification and youth as an achievement. Then came the ninth. The ninth man was the reason Amelia almost didn't come back today. His name was Walter Briggs. He was 43. A ranch hand with kind eyes and a gentle voice. He had spoken to Amelia for nearly an hour during his visit. He asked about her childhood, her parents, her dreams. He laughed at her dry humor. He told her she was smart, smarter than most men he knew. And at the end of that hour he stood up and said, "You seem like a good woman, Miss Bennet. A real good woman." Amelia had felt her heart begin to open. Just a fraction. Just enough to let light in. Then Walter said, "But I want an easier life." Those 5 words. 5 words that packed more pain than a slap across the face. Because Walter was not saying she was bad. He was not saying she was ugly or old or worthless. He was saying something far worse. He was saying her strength was a burden. That everything she had survived, the loss, the struggle, the years of fighting alone, made her too heavy to carry. That night alone in her rented room, Amelia sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall for 2 hours. She didn't cry. She had used up her tears a long time ago. Instead, she asked herself a question she had been avoiding. What if they're all right? What if 9 men, 9 different men with 9 different lives, all saw the same thing? What if she really was too much, too old, too strong, too damaged, too serious, too independent, too tested? What if the world was telling her something and she was too stubborn to listen? She sat with that question for a long time. The room was dark. The town was quiet. And Amelia Rose Bennet felt more alone than she had ever felt in her entire life. But something happened in that darkness. Something small. Something stubborn. Something that refused to be extinguished no matter how many times the wind blew. Amelia thought about her mother. Her mother had died when Amelia was 19. Consumption took her slowly, the way a river erodes a bank inch by inch, until there was nothing left to hold. But in her last weeks, her mother had said something Amelia carried like a stone in her pocket. "Amelia, the world will try to tell you who you are. It will use your failures. It will use your losses. It will use every hard thing that ever happened to you as proof that you are less than you are. Don't you ever believe it. The people who reject you are not measuring your worth. They are revealing their own limits." Amelia whispered those words into the dark room. Then she stood up. She opened her suitcase. She pulled out the list of 9 names, and she did something she had never done before. She turned the paper over and wrote one sentence on the back: "Their rejection is not my truth." Then she packed her suitcase, set it by the door, and laid down to sleep. Tomorrow, she would go back to the platform. For the 10th time. Morning came cold and sharp. Amelia dressed carefully. Not to impress anyone, but because she had learned that the way you prepare for battle matters, even when the battle is just standing still, while the world decides if you're worth choosing. She walked through Silver Creek with her suitcase in her hand. The same streets, the same faces, the same whispers. But today felt different. Not better, not hopeful, just final. Amelia could feel it in her bones, the way an old farmer feels rain coming before the first cloud appears. This was the last time. Not because she was giving up, but because something was going to change today. She didn't know if change would be good or bad. She just knew it was coming. The platform was already filling when she arrived. 14 women this time, more than usual. Word had spread that wealthy men from the outer territories were expected today, and every unmarried woman within 50 miles had come. Amelia took her usual place at the end of the line. She recognized some of the other women. Young, nervous, dressed in their best clothes, hands trembling with hope and fear in equal measure. A woman named Dorothy. Perhaps 35, a widow with 2 children, stood a few places down. She caught Amelia's eye and gave a small nod. Dorothy understood. She had been here before too, not 9 times, but enough to know what it felt like to be looked at and found lacking. "You came back," Dorothy said quietly. "So did you." Dorothy smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My children need a father. I don't have the luxury of pride." Amelia looked at her. "It's not pride that brings me back, Dorothy." "Then what is it?" Amelia thought about the question, really thought about it. "Stubbornness, maybe, or faith. I can't always tell the difference." Dorothy laughed softly. "In my experience, they're the same thing." The morning proceeded the way it always did. Men arrived. They walked the line. They made their choices. A 20-year-old named Ruth was chosen first. She cried with relief as she walked away with a young farmer who looked just as nervous as she did. A 23-year-old named Abigail was chosen next. Then a girl named Josephine. Then twins from the valley, Martha and Mary, both chosen by brothers from a neighboring county. One by one the platform emptied. Dorothy was chosen by a quiet widower named Samuel, who had 3 children of his own. They stood together awkwardly. 2 broken families, trying to become one, and Amelia watched them walk away, and felt something sharp twist in her chest. Not jealousy. Something closer to longing. By noon, the platform held only 4 women. By early afternoon, only 2. By mid-afternoon, Amelia stood alone. Again. The crowd that had gathered to watch began to thin. People drifted away in small groups, talking softly, glancing back at Amelia, the way people glance at a shipwreck with pity and the quiet relief that it wasn't them. Margaret Hollis was still there, of course, arms crossed, head shaking. 10 times, Margaret said to no one in particular. The woman has stood on that platform 10 times. At what point does determination become delusion? A man standing near Margaret. Old Ben Crawford, the town blacksmith, said quietly. Maybe at the point where someone finally sees what everyone else missed. Margaret scoffed. And when will that be, Ben? When she's 40, 50? Ben Crawford looked at Amelia standing alone on that platform, her back straight, her chin lifted, her suitcase at her feet. Could be today, he said. Could be never. But I'll tell you this much, Margaret. That woman has more spine than half the men in this territory. And if that doesn't count for something, then I don't know what does. Margaret opened her mouth to respond. But she never got the chance. Because at that exact moment, the sound of approaching horses stopped every conversation in Silver Creek. It started as a low rumble. Distant hooves on packed earth. The kind of sound that could mean a supply caravan or a cattle drive or nothing at all. But this was different. The riders came over the ridge in formation, 6 men on horseback riding in a tight line. Their horses were well-fed, well-groomed, the kind of animals only money could maintain. And at the front of the line rode a man who changed the temperature of the entire town just by arriving. Everett James Callahan. People stepped aside. Not because he demanded it, but because his presence filled a space the way a deep voice fills a room naturally without effort, impossible to ignore. Everett was 44 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, a face carved by decades of sun and wind and hard decisions. His hair was dark, streaked with silver at the temples. His eyes were the color of creek water in autumn, deep brown, almost black, and completely unreadable. He owned Callahan Ridge Ranch, 12,000 acres of prime Montana grassland, the largest single ranch in Silver Creek Territory. He ran over 3,000 head of cattle. He employed 27 men. He had built his empire from a small homestead. His father left him turning 200 acres into a kingdom through nothing but intelligence, discipline, and an iron will. But here was the thing about Everett James Callahan that nobody in Silver Creek could explain. He was alone. For 15 years, the richest man in the territory had lived without a wife, without a family, without anyone beside him. People had theories, of course. They always do. Some said he was too proud, too demanding, that no woman could ever meet his standards. Some said he had loved a woman once years ago, and when she died, he sealed that part of himself shut like a mine after a collapse. Some said he simply didn't need anyone, that his ranch was his wife, his cattle were his children, his land was his love. None of them were entirely wrong, but none of them were right either. Everett dismounted slowly. He handed his reins to one of his men, a foreman named Jack Dawson, who had worked for him for 11 years. "Wait here," Everett said. Jack looked at the platform, looked at the single woman still standing on it, then looked back at his boss. "You sure about this?" Jack asked. Everett didn't answer. He adjusted his coat and walked toward the platform. The crowd parted. Every eye in Silver Creek followed him. Women who had already been chosen leaned out of doorways to watch. Men who had done the choosing stopped their conversations mid-sentence. Because Everett Callahan had never come to the bride platform before, not once in 15 years. And the fact that he was walking toward it now today of all days meant something, even if nobody knew what. Everett reached the platform. He stopped at the bottom of the 3 wooden steps and looked up at the woman standing alone at the far end. Amelia looked back at him. She didn't know who he was. Not yet. She had heard the name Callahan before everyone in Montana had, but she had never seen the man himself. All she saw was a tall stranger with unreadable eyes who had walked past every distraction and every whisper and stopped in front of her. He climbed the steps slowly. 1, 2, 3. Then he stood on the platform 6 feet away from her, and the entire town held its breath. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Amelia studied him the way she studied everything carefully without illusion, looking for the catch. Because in her experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it was because someone was about to ask her to pay a price she couldn't afford. But Everett wasn't looking at her the way the others had. He wasn't scanning her face for beauty. He wasn't checking her hands for softness. He wasn't calculating her age or measuring her against the younger women who had already been chosen. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a horizon, with patience and distance, and the understanding that what you see on the surface is never the full truth. "How many times have you stood here?" he asked. His voice was low, calm, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. Amelia hesitated. She could lie. She could say this was her 2nd or 3rd time. She could protect herself the way she had learned to protect herself, by hiding the parts of her story that made people walk away. But something in his voice stopped her, something that sounded like it had earned the right to ask. 9, she said. "This is my 10th. Everett's expression didn't change. No surprise, no pity, no judgment. "And why did you come back?" Amelia looked at him, really looked at him, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she told him the truth. Not the polished version, not the brave version, the real one. "Because if I stop, it means they were right about me. Every man who looked at me and decided I wasn't enough, if I stop coming back, I'm agreeing with them. I'm saying, yes, you were right. I am too old. I am too broken. I am too much. She paused. And I am not ready to agree with that. The silence that followed was so complete that Amelia could hear her own heartbeat. Then, Everett James Callahan did something that no man on that platform had ever done. He smiled. Not a wide smile. Not a charming smile. Not the kind of smile a man uses to make a woman feel comfortable. A real smile. Small and quiet, and full of something that looked like respect. That, he said, is the first honest answer I have heard in years. He took one step closer. My name is Everett Callahan. I own a ranch north of here. It's large, it's complicated, and it needs someone with the kind of strength that 10 visits to this platform would require. Amelia's breath caught. Mr. Callahan. I'm not proposing, he said quickly. I don't believe in choosing a life partner the way a man chooses a horse at auction. Then what are you doing? Everett looked at her steadily. I'm asking if you'd be willing to let me court you properly, to let us learn whether what I see in you right now is as real as I think it is. Amelia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not physically. Something deeper. Something tectonic. You don't know anything about me, she said. I know you've been rejected 9 times and came back for a 10th. That tells me more about your character than any conversation could. It could also tell you I'm foolish. It could, Everett agreed. But I've built a 12,000-acre ranch from nothing, and the one thing I've learned is the difference between a fool and a fighter. He paused. You, Miss Bennett, are not a fool. Amelia stood there on that empty platform in front of the entire town of Silver Creek, with the afternoon sun cutting long shadows across the weathered boards, and she felt something she had forbidden herself from feeling for a very long time. She felt seen, not evaluated, not measured, not assessed. Seen. One conversation, she said finally. That's all I'm agreeing to. Everett nodded. One conversation is all I'm asking for. He extended his hand. Amelia looked at it. Rough, calloused. A hand that had built something real. She took it. And in that single moment, Margaret Hollis closed her mouth. Old Ben Crawford smiled into his beard, and the town of Silver Creek witnessed something none of them expected. The woman nobody wanted just said yes to the man everybody wanted, and not a single person standing there could have predicted what would happen next. Part 2. The test she didn't know she was taking, and not a single person standing there could have predicted that within 3 days, Amelia Rose Bennett would be riding north toward the largest ranch in Montana, sitting in a wagon beside a man she barely knew, carrying everything she owned in one broken suitcase, wondering if she had just made the bravest decision of her life, or the most dangerous one. Everett didn't speak much during the ride. He held the reins with the kind of quiet control that told Amelia this was a man who measured his words the way a carpenter measures wood carefully, because once you cut, you can't take it back. She sat beside him and let the silence stretch. Most people feared silence. Amelia had learned to read it, and Everett's silence was not cold. It was not dismissive. It was the silence of a man who was giving her room. Room to breathe, room to think, room to decide for herself whether she wanted to be here. After nearly an hour, Amelia broke it. You said you wanted a conversation. You haven't said a word since we left Silver Creek. Everett glanced at her. I've been listening. To what I haven't spoken either. Exactly. Most people fill silence because they're afraid of what it might reveal. You sat there for an hour without a single nervous word. That tells me more than a conversation would. Amelia studied him. Are you always this calculating? I prefer the word observant. I'm sure you do. The corner of Everett's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Miss Bennett, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you're the kind of woman who prefers that. I am. Good. My ranch is not a small operation. It's not a farmhouse with a garden and a milk cow. It's a business. A complicated one. I have 27 men working for me, thousands of cattle supply lines that stretch across 3 territories, and enough financial records to fill a courthouse. He paused. I've been running it alone for 15 years, and I've done well. But I'm 44 years old, and I've started to realize something. What's that? That building something alone proves you're strong. But keeping it alone proves you're stubborn. And there's a point where stubbornness stops being a strength and starts being a slow way of losing everything you built. Amelia felt those words land somewhere deep, because she understood them. She understood them in a way that most people never would. "So you're looking for help," she said. Everett shook his head. "I'm looking for a partner. There's a difference. Most men don't know the difference. Most men haven't spent 15 years learning it the hard way," they wrote on. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Warmer. Like a door had been opened just enough to let light through. Then Amelia asked the question she'd been holding since the platform. "Why were you at the bride selection?" "Mr. Callahan, a man like you, wealthy, established, respected, you could have your pick of any woman in Montana. You could write to agencies back east. You could marry a senator's daughter or a railroad baron's niece. Why were you standing on a wooden platform in Silver Creek, choosing from a line of farm women?" Everett was quiet for so long that Amelia thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because a senator's daughter would see my ranch and think about the wealth. A railroad baron's niece would see my land and think about the status. The women in those circles would marry the ranch Miss Bennett, not the man. And I've spent enough years alone to know the difference between being wanted and being useful." "And you think a farm woman from a bride platform would be different?" "Not necessarily, but a farm woman who came back 10 times after being rejected 9. That's not someone chasing comfort. That's someone fighting for something real." Amelia turned away so he couldn't see her face, because something in her chest had cracked open and she needed a moment before she could speak without her voice betraying her. When she turned back, her eyes were clear and her voice was steady. "One conversation, Mr. Callahan. That's what I agreed to. And we're having it. So we are." They arrived at Callahan Ridge Ranch as the sun hung low, and Amelia's first thought was not about the size of the property or the number of buildings or the scale of the operation. Her first thought was, this place needs a woman's eye. Not because it was dirty. Not because it was disorganized in any obvious way, but because she could feel it, the subtle neglect that happens when a place is managed efficiently, but not cared for. The difference between a house that functions and a home that lives. She kept that thought to herself. Everett led her to a small guest cabin near the main house. Clean, simple, private. "You'll stay here," he said, "for as long as you want. No obligations. No expectations. If after a week you decide this isn't right, I'll personally escort you back to Silver Creek." Amelia set her suitcase on the floor. "And if I decide it is right?" Everett looked at her from the doorway. "Then we'll talk about what comes next." He tipped his hat and left. Amelia stood alone in the cabin and let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for 3 days. The next morning, Amelia woke at dawn. Force of habit. Years of farm work had built a clock inside her body that no amount of rest could override. She dressed and stepped outside to find the ranch already alive with activity. Men were moving cattle. Horses were being saddled. Somewhere a hammer rang against iron. She walked toward the main house, unsure of her place, unsure of what was expected, unsure of everything except one thing. She was not going to sit in that cabin and wait to be summoned like a guest at someone else's table. She found Everett in a room off the main hall that served as his office. He was bent over a desk covered in papers, ledgers, and supply records. A cup of coffee sat untouched beside him, already cold. He looked up when she entered. "You're awake early," he said. "I've been awake early every day for the last 15 years. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down." She sat. Everett pushed a stack of ledgers toward her. "These are the ranch accounts for the last 6 months. Expenses, revenue, supply orders, payroll." Amelia looked at the ledgers, then back at him. "Why are you showing me these?" "Because I told you I was looking for a partner. Partners need to understand the business. Most men wouldn't show their financial records to a woman they met 3 days ago. Most men are guarding something. I'm not." Amelia pulled the first ledger toward her and opened it. She ran her finger down the columns slowly, her lips moving slightly as she calculated. Everett watched her without interrupting. After 20 minutes, Amelia looked up. You're overpaying for grain. Everett's eyebrows rose. Excuse me. Your grain supplier Henderson, according to these records, is charging you 18% above market rate. You've been paying it for at least 4 months. Either he raised his prices and hoped you wouldn't notice, or someone in your operation is getting a cut. Everett leaned back in his chair. His expression was unreadable, but something shifted behind his eyes. Go on. Amelia flipped to another page. Your payroll has a discrepancy. You're paying 27 men, but your work logs only show consistent entries for 24. 3 names appear on the payroll, but rarely show up in the daily records. Either they're doing work that isn't being logged, or you're paying for labor you're not receiving. The room went very still. Everett said nothing for a long time. Then he asked, How long did it take you to see that? 20 minutes. My foreman has been reviewing these books for 11 years and never caught it. Amelia closed the ledger. Your foreman isn't looking for problems. He's maintaining a system. There's a difference between managing something and actually seeing it. Everett stood up slowly. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her. Miss Bennett, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. I've never answered any other way. He turned around. When you managed your family's farm before it went under, were you good at it? Amelia met his eyes. The farm didn't fail because I was bad at running it, Mr. Callahan. It failed because 3 consecutive drought years destroyed the crops my father died, and the bank called in a loan that was taken out before I was old enough to understand what a loan was. I managed that farm alone for 3 years after my father's death. I kept it running on half the resources and a quarter of the labor. And when it finally went under, it wasn't because I failed. It was because some things break no matter how hard you hold them together. Everett looked at her for a long moment. I believe you, he said. And those 2 words, simple, plain, undecorated, hit Amelia harder than any rejection ever had. Because she realized, standing in that office with cold coffee and open ledgers between them, that no one had said those words to her in years. Not, I'm sorry. Not, that's a shame. Not, you poor thing. I believe you. As if her word was enough. As if her testimony required no proof. Over the next several days, Amelia did not sit idle. She woke every morning before the ranch hands. She walked the property. She talked to the workers, not as their boss's guest, but as someone who understood hard labor because she had lived it. The men were suspicious at first. A stranger. A woman. Brought here by Mr. Callahan under circumstances no one fully understood. A ranch hand named Billy Dawes, 26, sharp-tongued and protective of his territory, was the first to test her. He approached her on the 3rd morning while she was examining the feed storage. You know what you're looking at? He asked. His tone was polite, but the challenge underneath was clear. Amelia didn't look up. Mixed oat and barley feed, approximately 60% oat ratio based on the color and texture. Stored too long, you can see the moisture damage at the base of the 2nd barrel. If you feed this to cattle, you'll lose weight on them within 2 weeks. Billy stared at her. How do you? I ran a farm, Mr. Dawes, a small one. But small farms teach you to notice everything because you can't afford to waste anything. Billy Dawes went quiet. He looked at the barrel, looked at the moisture damage he had walked past every morning for 3 weeks without noticing. Then he said, I'll have it replaced today. You should also check the 3rd and 4th barrels. If the moisture got to one, it likely reached the others. Billy hesitated, then he nodded. Yes, ma'am. He walked away, and Amelia felt something shift. Not respect, not yet, but the absence of dismissal, which for a woman who had been dismissed 9 times, felt almost like a victory. On the 4th day, Everett invited Amelia to ride the property with him. They rode side by side along the fence line. Everett pointed out boundaries, water sources, grazing rotations. He spoke about the ranch the way a man speaks about something he loves, with detail, with pride, and with the quiet fear that comes from knowing how much there is to lose. Amelia listened. She asked questions, specific questions, the kind that made Everett pause mid-sentence and look at her as if recalculating who she was. Your eastern pasture, she said. How often do you rotate the cattle through it? Every 6 weeks. That's too long. The grass height along the fence suggests overgrazing in the southeast section. If you shortened the rotation to 4 weeks and split the pasture into 2 sections, you'd increase regrowth by at least 30%. Everett pulled his horse to a stop. You can tell that from looking at the grass. I can tell that from losing a farm because I didn't look at the grass soon enough. He watched her for a moment. You learned from your failures. I learned from everything, Mr. Callahan. The failures just taught louder. They rode on. After a while, Everett said something that surprised her. My foreman, Jack. He's been with me 11 years. He's loyal. He's hard-working. But he's also the reason those payroll discrepancies exist. Amelia turned sharply. He's stealing from you. No, he's protecting someone who is. His younger brother, Pete. Pete is one of the 3 names you found, the ones on the payroll who don't show up in the work logs. Pete has a drinking problem. Jack put him on the payroll to keep him fed. The other 2 are Pete's friends. Amelia processed this. You already knew. I suspected. I never confirmed it because confirming it would mean confronting Jack. And Jack is the closest thing I have to family on this ranch. So you've been paying 3 men who don't work to avoid a difficult conversation with the 1 man who does. Everett didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. Sometimes the cost of loyalty is silence, Miss Bennett. And sometimes the cost of silence is everything. Everett looked at her. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Amelia saw something in his eyes that wasn't control or calculation. It was pain. Old pain. Carefully buried. The kind you don't show because showing it gives others power over you. What would you do, he asked, if this were your ranch, your decision? Amelia thought carefully before answering. I would talk to Jack, not to accuse him, not to punish him, but to tell him the truth that I know that I understand why he did it, and that we need to find a solution that doesn't cost the ranch 3 salaries for work that isn't being done. And if Jack takes it badly, then Jack isn't as loyal as you think he is. Real loyalty doesn't require you to go broke protecting it. Everett was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, Will you be there when I talk to him? The question struck Amelia like a physical force, because it wasn't a request for help. It was something far bigger than that. It was trust. If you want me there, she said, I'll be there. The conversation with Jack Dawson happened the next evening. Jack was a big man. Weathered, scarred hands, eyes that had seen hard country and harder choices. He had been Everett's right hand for over a decade, and he walked into that office expecting a routine meeting about cattle rotation. When he saw Amelia sitting in the corner, he stopped. What's she doing here? Jack asked. Not hostile, but not warm. Everett sat behind his desk. Sit down, Jack. Jack sat. His eyes moved between Everett and Amelia. I need to talk to you about Pete, Everett said. Jack's entire body changed. His shoulders locked. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the arms of the chair. What about Pete? He's on the payroll, so are 2 of his friends. None of them have worked a full week in the last 4 months. The silence that filled the room was the kind that precedes either violence or confession. Amelia could feel the tension radiating off Jack Dawson, like heat from a branding iron. Who told you? Jack asked. Nobody told me. I should have seen it myself a long time ago. Jack's eyes shifted to Amelia. She told you. She found it in the ledgers, in 20 minutes. Something I should have caught years ago. Jack's hands were shaking, not with anger, with shame. Mr. Callahan, Jack said, his voice rough. Pete is my brother. He's all the family I got. After the war, he came back different. Broken inside. He can't hold a job. He can't stay sober. I put him on the books because I didn't know what else to do. I know, Everett said quietly. I was going to tell you. I kept meaning to. I know that too, Jack. Jack looked down at his hands. So what happens now? You fire me. Fire Pete. We pack our bags. Everett leaned forward. Nobody is getting fired. Jack's head snapped up. Amelia spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, measured. Not cold, but firm. Mr. Dawson, your brother needs help. Real help. Not a name on a payroll that covers for a problem without solving it. There are jobs on this ranch that Pete could do lighter work structured days, something that gives him purpose, without requiring him to carry weight he can't handle. Jack stared at her. You don't know my brother. No. But I know what it looks like when someone is falling apart, and the people who love them think that carrying the weight alone is the same as fixing it. Jack turned back to Everett. You're listening to her. Everett's voice was steady. I'm listening to the only person who's been honest with me in this office in 11 years, including you, Jack. The words landed like a hammer on stone. Jack Dawson sat in that chair for a full minute without moving. His jaw worked. His eyes burned. Amelia watched a man fighting between his pride and his conscience, and she recognized the battle because she had fought it herself more times than she could count. Then Jack's shoulders dropped. Not in defeat, in surrender. The kind of surrender that comes when you finally stop carrying something too heavy alone. What do you want me to do? He asked. Everett looked at Amelia. She understood the look. He was not asking her permission. He was telling her this is yours. Handle it. Remove the two friends from the payroll, Amelia said. They'll need to find their own work. For Pete, we create a position that matches what he can actually do. Something with structure. Something that keeps him accountable without crushing him. And Jack, you stop hiding this. You stop carrying it alone. Because the weight of a secret like this doesn't just break the person keeping it. It breaks everything around them. Jack Dawson looked at Amelia Rose Bennett. This woman he had never met before a week ago. This stranger his boss had brought home from a bride platform, and he saw something he did not expect. He saw someone who understood. Not because she had read about hardship in a book, but because she had lived it. Because she had been the person others gave up on. Because she knew what it meant to be broken and still standing. You've been through it too, Jack said quietly. It was not a question. More than you know, Amelia replied. Jack stood up. He extended his hand toward Amelia. She took it. His grip was firm. His eyes were wet. But he held himself together the way people do when they know that falling apart is a luxury they cannot afford. Thank you, ma'am, he said. Then he walked out of the office, and the door closed behind him, and the room fell silent. Everett sat back in his chair and looked at Amelia for a long time. You know what just happened? He asked. You resolved a problem that's been costing you money for years. Everett shook his head. No. Jack Dawson has worked for me for 11 years. He has never once listened to another person the way he listened to you just now. He never would have accepted that from me. Not like that. Amelia's voice was quiet. Because you're his boss. He respects you. But respect and trust aren't the same thing. And he trusts you. After 5 days. He doesn't trust me. He recognizes me. There's a difference. Everett stood up. He walked around the desk. He stopped 2 feet from Amelia and looked directly into her eyes. Miss Bennett, I have spent 15 years running this ranch alone. I have made every decision solved, every problem fought, every battle by myself. And in 5 days, you have done something I never managed in all that time. What's that? You made someone feel safe enough to tell the truth. Amelia felt her breath catch. She held his gaze, searching for the thing she always looked for. The catch, the condition, the hidden price. She didn't find it. Mr. Callahan. Everett. The word hung between them. Everett, she repeated, and the sound of his name in her voice felt like crossing a threshold she could not step back from. This courtship, he said. I told you I would give you a week. It's been 5 days. You have 2 more days to decide. Amelia looked at him. Decide what exactly? Whether you want to stay, not as a guest, as a partner. A partner in the ranch. A partner in everything. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to say yes. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to say yes, to grab this chance with both hands before it disappeared the way every other chance had. But she had been burned before. Not by cruelty, by hope. Hope was the thing that opened you up just enough for the next rejection to reach the places you thought you had protected. I need the full 2 days, she said. Everett nodded. Take them. He stepped back. He returned to his desk. He picked up his cold coffee and drank it as if nothing had happened. But Amelia saw his hand tremble just slightly, just for a moment, and she understood that she was not the only person in that room who was afraid. That night, Amelia lay in the guest cabin and stared at the ceiling and fought the hardest battle of her life. Not against rejection, against acceptance, because rejection was familiar. Rejection was a country she had mapped and survived. She knew its terrain, its weather, its dangers. She could navigate rejection the way a sailor navigates rough seas, not with joy, but with skill. But acceptance was foreign territory. Uncharted. Dangerous in a completely different way. Because acceptance asked you to open the door you had spent years reinforcing. It asked you to believe that maybe, just maybe, the next person who walked through it wasn't going to burn the house down. She pulled out the piece of paper from her suitcase. The one with 9 names on one side and 5 words on the other. Their rejection is not my truth. She read those words 3 times. Then she turned the paper over and stared at the 9 names. Douglas Parnell. Thomas Greer. The unnamed 3rd. The 4th who blamed her hardship. The 5th who wanted someone lighter. The 6th who wanted laughter. Hank Morrison who said she was too difficult to reach. The 8th who wanted youth. Walter Briggs who wanted an easier life. 9 men. 9 judgments. 9 doors slammed shut. And now a 10th door was open. The question was whether she had enough left in her to walk through it. She thought about her mother's words. About the difference between being measured and being seen. About Everett's hand trembling on his coffee cup. She thought about Jack Dawson's face when he shook her hand. The look in his eyes. The recognition. She thought about Billy Dawes checking the feed barrels because she told him to. She thought about the ledgers, the overpaid grain, the missing workers. 20 minutes of work that had solved problems no one else could see. And she realized something. For 5 days, she had been testing Everett, watching him, measuring him, looking for the flaw, the trap, the hidden agenda. But Everett had been testing her too. Not with questions, not with challenges, not with tricks, with trust. He had opened his books, shown her his weaknesses, introduced her to his people, let her into the machinery of his life without conditions or safeguards. He had trusted her before she gave him any reason to, and that act of faith was the one thing 9 previous men had never offered her. Not their approval, not their desire, not their willingness to choose her over someone younger or softer or easier. Their trust. Amelia sat up in bed. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were steady. She folded the paper with the 9 names and placed it back in her suitcase. Then she closed the suitcase, buckled it shut, slid it under the bed. She did not need it anymore. On the morning of the 7th day, Amelia walked to the main house at dawn. Everett was already in his office. Coffee untouched, ledgers open, the same routine, the same discipline. But when Amelia walked through the door, he looked up with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Fear. Real, unguarded, exposed fear. The fear of a man who had spent 15 years alone and was about to find out whether loneliness was a choice or a sentence. Amelia stood in front of his desk. She did not sit down. I have an answer, she said. Everett set down his pen. His jaw was tight. His eyes were locked on hers. I need to say something first, Amelia continued, before I give you my answer. Say it. I have been rejected 9 times. Every one of those rejections took something from me. A piece of confidence. A piece of hope. A piece of the part of me that believed I deserved something good. And I won't lie to you, standing here right now terrifies me more than any of those rejections ever did. Everett said nothing. Because rejection, I know how to survive. I've practiced it. I'm good at it. But this, whatever this is, I don't have practice for this. And the idea of opening myself up to something real and having it collapse is the one thing I'm not sure I can recover from. She paused. But I've spent 5 days on this ranch. I've seen your books. I've met your people. I've watched the way you make decisions, and the way you treat the men who work for you, and the way you handle problems that would break a lesser man." She took a breath. "And I've realized something, Everett. Something I didn't expect." "What?" "That I'm not afraid of being rejected again. I'm afraid of being the one who walks away from the first person who actually saw me." The room was silent. Everett stood up slowly. He came around the desk. He stopped in front of her. "Is that a yes?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Amelia looked into the eyes of a man who had built an empire alone and found the courage to admit he couldn't sustain it. A man who had walked past every young, easy, uncomplicated choice on that platform and stopped in front of the woman everyone else had given up on. "It's a yes," she said. Everett James Callahan let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for 15 years. And then he took her hand gently, carefully, the way a man holds something he knows is both strong and precious. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, neither of them was alone. But Amelia still carried a question. One question she hadn't asked yet. One question that burned inside her like an ember buried under ash. She would ask it soon, and his answer would be the one thing she never expected to hear. Part 3. The answer never expected. And his answer would be the one thing she never expected to hear, but that answer was still weeks away, buried under layers of trial and conflict and quiet transformation that neither Amelia nor Everett could have predicted the morning she said yes. Because saying yes was not the end of the battle. It was the beginning of a new one. The first challenge came from the ranch itself. Not from the land. Not from the cattle. From the men. 27 workers had spent years under Everett's command. They knew his rhythms. They understood his expectations. They had built their routines around a single authority, one voice, one decision-maker, one boss. Now there was a woman walking the property at dawn. A woman checking ledgers. A woman asking questions about feed quality and grazing rotation and payroll records. And not just any woman. The woman from the bride platform. The one who had been rejected 9 times. The whispers started within days. Amelia didn't hear all of them, but she heard enough. "Callahan's lost his mind," said a ranch hand named Frank Moody during a morning feed run. Frank was 40 lean and had the kind of loyalty that came from years of habit rather than genuine respect. "Bringing a woman out here to run a cattle operation. Next he'll have her branding steers." "She's not running anything," said Billy Dawes, who had already seen Amelia identify the spoiled feed barrels. "She's just looking around." "Looking around is how it starts," Frank replied. "First she looks, then she suggests, then she decides. And before you know it, we're taking orders from a woman who couldn't even get a husband after 9 tries. Billy went quiet. He didn't defend Amelia, but he didn't agree with Frank either. And that silence, the silence of a man who was reconsidering his assumptions, was something Amelia would come to rely on in the weeks ahead. Jack Dawson was a different problem. Since the conversation about Pete, Jack had been cordial to Amelia. Polite. Professional. But underneath the professionalism was a wound that hadn't healed. She had walked into his boss's office and exposed a secret he had carried for years. She had done it calmly, efficiently, without malice, but the result was the same. She had cracked him open in front of the one person whose opinion mattered most to him. And Jack Dawson was not a man who forgave easily. Amelia sensed it. She felt the distance in his voice when he spoke to her. The way he answered her questions with as few words as possible. The way he positioned himself between her and Everett during ranch meetings, not physically blocking her, but making it clear through posture, through timing, through the subtle politics of proximity that he was Everett's right hand, and she was a guest. On the 9th day, the tension broke. Amelia was reviewing supply invoices in the office when Jack walked in unannounced. "We need to talk," he said. Amelia set down the invoice. "Close the door." Jack hesitated. Then he closed it. "What is it, Mr. Dawson?" Jack stood across the desk from her, his arms folded, his jaw working. He was a man fighting to keep his voice level. "The men are talking," he said. "Men always talk. This is different. Frank Moody is stirring things up. telling the hands that you're going to start making decisions about operations, that you're going to change the way things work around here. And is that a problem? Jack's eyes hardened. It is if you don't have the authority to back it up. I have Everett's trust. Trust isn't authority, Miss Bennett. Trust is what a man gives you in private. Authority is what the men see in public. And right now, the men see a woman sitting at the boss's desk, going through papers she has no official reason to touch. Amelia leaned back in her chair. She studied Jack carefully. She could see the real question behind his words, the one he was too proud to ask directly. You're not worried about the men, Jack. You're worried about yourself. Jack flinched. Excuse me. You've been Everett's second for 11 years. You've earned that position. And now a stranger walks in and within a week she's sitting in this office doing work that used to be yours. You're not protecting the ranch from me. You're protecting your place in it. Jack's face went red. His fists clenched at his sides. For a moment, Amelia thought he might slam his hand on the desk or walk out and never speak to her again. Instead, he did something she didn't expect. He laughed. Not a warm laugh. Not a happy laugh. A rough, broken sound that came from somewhere deep in his chest, the laugh of a man who has just been caught in a lie he's been telling himself. You're something else, Miss Bennett, he said. You know that. I've been told. Jack unfolded his arms. The tension in his body didn't disappear, but it shifted from defensive to something closer to resignation. I've given this ranch 11 years of my life, he said quietly. 11 years of early mornings and late nights and broken bones and decisions that kept me up wondering if I got them right. And in 5 days, you walked in and saw things I missed. Things I should have caught. Things that were my responsibility. He paused. That doesn't feel good, Miss Bennett. I won't pretend it does. Amelia nodded slowly. It shouldn't feel good. Honest things rarely do. But Jack, I didn't come here to replace you. I couldn't run this ranch without you, and neither could Everett. What I can do is see things from a different angle. Not a better angle. A different one. And what angle is that? The angle of someone who lost everything once, and learned to look at numbers and people and systems the way a doctor looks at a patient, not just for what's working, but for what's about to fail. Jack stared at her. Something in his expression changed. Not completely. Not all at once. But the way a frozen river changes in spring slowly from underneath in a place you can't see, but you know is real. Frank Moody is going to be a problem, Jack said. He's got 3 or 4 men listening to him. They're not bad workers, but they don't like change. And you, Miss Bennett, you are change walking on 2 legs. Then we deal with Frank Moody. How? Amelia picked up the supply invoice she had been reviewing. This invoice is from Frank's supply run last Tuesday. He purchased $120 worth of fencing wire from Hardin's Supply in town. That's right. Hardin's charges $1.40 per spool. At that rate, $120 buys 85 spools. But the inventory log shows only 72 spools delivered to the ranch. Jack's expression went flat. 13 spools short. 13 spools short. Either Hardin's cheated him, or Frank kept the difference. You think Frank is stealing. I think 13 spools of fencing wire didn't walk off on their own. Jack Dawson stood very still. He looked at Amelia, the way a man looks at a thunderstorm rolling in with equal parts respect and unease. I'll look into it, he said. We'll look into it, Amelia corrected. Together. Jack held her gaze for a long moment. Then he gave one short nod. Together. He walked out. The door closed behind him. And Amelia sat alone in that office and allowed herself one small private moment of triumph. Not because she had won an argument, but because she had turned an adversary into something that might with time become an ally. Everett found out about the confrontation with Jack that evening. Not from Amelia, from Jack himself. Jack walked into the barn, where Everett was checking on a sick horse, and said without preamble, "Your woman caught Frank Moody skimming on supply runs." Everett looked up. "She's not my woman, Jack. She's her own woman. That's the whole point." Jack ignored the correction. 13 spools of fencing wire, missing from Tuesday's delivery. The numbers don't add up. Are you sure? I checked it myself after she showed me. She's right. Everett straightened up slowly. And how do you feel about that? Jack pulled off his hat and rubbed his forehead. Honestly, I feel like I've been doing my job with one eye closed for the last decade, and she walked in with both eyes open. Does that bother you? It did. This morning it did. But then I thought about it, and I realized something. What's that? She's not trying to take my job. She's trying to do the job nobody knew needed doing. And if I'm smart, which I like to think I am, most days I'll stop fighting her and start learning from her. Everett smiled. It was the same small, quiet smile he had given Amelia on the platform. The smile of a man watching the world rearrange itself into a better shape. Tell me something, Jack. In 11 years, have I ever made a bad decision about people? Jack thought about it. No, sir. Not that I can recall. Then trust me on this one. Jack put his hat back on. I'm starting to Mr. Callahan. Lord help me, I'm starting to. The situation with Frank Moody came to a head 4 days later. Amelia and Jack confronted Frank together in the supply shed. They laid out the numbers, the invoices, the inventory discrepancy, 13 missing spools. Frank's reaction was exactly what Amelia expected. You're accusing me of stealing. Frank's voice was loud, aggressive, the voice of a man who knows he's caught but thinks volume can substitute for innocence. Nobody is accusing anyone, Amelia said evenly. The numbers don't match. We need to understand why. I don't answer to you, Frank snapped. You're not my boss. You're not even your nobody. You're the woman from the platform. You're the one nobody wanted. The words hit the air like a gunshot. Jack Dawson stepped forward. Watch your mouth, Frank. Or what, you going to let her fire me? A woman who couldn't get a single man to choose her is now deciding who works on the biggest ranch in Montana. Amelia held up her hand. Jack stopped. She looked at Frank Moody with an expression that held no anger, no hurt, no defensiveness. Just clarity. Mr. Moody, you're right about one thing. 9 men rejected me. That is a fact. But here is another fact. 13 spools of fencing wire are missing from your supply run, and the numbers in your invoice don't match the inventory. Now you can stand here and attack my character, or you can explain the discrepancy. But only one of those options keeps you employed. Frank's face went white, then red. His hands shook. He looked at Jack for support for the old alliance, for the brotherhood of men who understood that women didn't belong in these conversations. Jack looked back at him with nothing. The spools are at my place, Frank said finally. His voice had collapsed. All the bluster, all the aggression drained out like water from a cracked bucket. I took them. I needed to fix my own fencing, and I didn't have the money. That's theft, Frank, Jack said quietly. I know what it is. Amelia spoke before Jack could continue. Return the spools by tomorrow morning. The cost will be deducted from your next 3 weeks' pay. If it happens again, you're done here. Frank stared at her. You'd keep me on? Everyone makes mistakes, Mr. Moody. The question is whether you're the kind of man who makes the same mistake twice. Frank stood there for a long time. His eyes were wet. His pride was shattered. But underneath the humiliation, something else flickered, something that looked impossibly like gratitude. I'll have them back by sunrise, he said. He walked out. Jack turned to Amelia. Most bosses would have fired him on the spot. Most bosses haven't been given second chances themselves. I know what it feels like to be defined by your worst moment, Jack. I won't do that to someone else. Jack Dawson looked at Amelia Rose Bennett and shook his head slowly. Where did you come from? He asked, and for the first time the question held no suspicion. Only wonder. News of what happened with Frank Moody spread through the ranch within hours. Not because Frank talked about it, he was too ashamed for that, but because ranches are small worlds, and small worlds have no secrets. The story traveled in whispers. How the woman from the platform caught Frank stealing. How she confronted him without raising her voice. How she gave him a chance to make it right instead of destroying him. And slowly, not overnight, not in a single dramatic moment, but gradually, the way a river changes course, the men's attitude toward Amelia began to shift. Billy Dawes started bringing her his weekly supply reports without being asked. A quiet ranch hand named George Fuller sought her out to ask about optimizing the hay storage. Even the cook. A gruff old man named Theodore, who hadn't voluntarily spoken to a woman since his wife died in 1878, started leaving an extra plate of food at her cabin door each evening with a note that simply said, "Eat." Amelia noticed each small change. She cataloged them the way she cataloged everything carefully, precisely, without assuming they meant more than they did. Because she had learned through 9 rejections and a lifetime of disappointment that acceptance could be withdrawn as quickly as it was offered. But she also noticed something else. Something inside herself that she hadn't felt in years. A sense of belonging. Not the desperate, grasping kind of belonging that comes from needing someone else to validate your existence, but the quiet, steady kind that comes from doing work that matters and being recognized, not praised, not celebrated, just recognized for doing it well. It was the most terrifying feeling she had ever experienced, because belonging meant having something to lose. 3 weeks after Amelia arrived at Callahan Ridge, a man rode into the ranch at dusk. His name was Calvin Marsh. He was a cattle broker from Helena, and he had come with a proposition for Everett, a massive contract to supply beef to the railroad construction camps pushing west through Montana. The contract was worth more money than Everett had ever seen in a single deal. Enough to secure the ranch for a decade. Enough to expand operations, hire more men, buy more land. But the terms were complicated, and the man offering them was not to be trusted. Amelia knew this because she recognized Calvin Marsh. Not personally, but she recognized his type. She had met men like him during her years managing the family farm, men who smiled too easily, who spoke in numbers that sounded too good, who wrapped traps in the language of opportunity. Calvin sat in Everett's office with a glass of whiskey and a contract that was 32 pages long. "It's straightforward, Callahan," Calvin said, leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who had made this pitch 100 times. "You supply 200 head per month to the railroad camps. Guaranteed purchase, guaranteed price, 12-month contract with an option to extend." Everett studied the document. "The price per head is below market. Slightly below, but you're getting volume and consistency. No more chasing individual buyers. No more haggling at auction. Steady income every month like clockwork." Everett looked at Amelia, who was sitting in the corner of the office reading her own copy of the contract. She had insisted on being present for all business meetings. Everett had not objected. "What do you think, Miss Bennett?" Everett asked. Calvin Marsh turned to look at Amelia as if noticing her for the first time. His smile thinned. "I didn't realize we'd have an audience for this," Calvin said pleasantly. Too pleasantly. "Miss Bennett is my partner in ranch operations," Everett said. "Her opinion matters." Calvin's smile didn't waver, but his eyes cooled. "Of course." Amelia didn't look up from the contract. "Page 17, she said. "Excuse me," Calvin replied. "Page 17, paragraph 4, the penalty clause. If Callahan Ridge fails to deliver the full 200 head in any given month, for any reason, including drought, disease, weather, or act of God, the ranch forfeits the entire month's payment and owes a penalty of 15% of the contract's annual value." The room went still. Calvin's smile finally cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. Everett flipped to page 17. Read the paragraph. Read it again. 1 bad month. Amelia continued, her voice level. "And this ranch doesn't just lose income, it owes Calvin's company nearly $3,000. 2 bad months, and you're leveraged to the point where the only way out is to sell land. 3 bad months, and Callahan Ridge belongs to the railroad." She looked up at Calvin Marsh. "This isn't a supply contract, Mr. Marsh. It's an acquisition strategy disguised as an opportunity." Calvin Marsh's face hardened. The folksy charm evaporated like morning frost. "That's a very dramatic interpretation, Miss Bennett, Amelia Bennett. And it's not an interpretation, it's arithmetic." Calvin turned to Everett. "Callahan, I came here in good faith." "You came here hoping I wouldn't read page 17, Everett said quietly. "The penalty clause is standard in contracts of this size." "It is not standard. I've signed cattle contracts before. A standard penalty clause allows for force majeure exceptions, Yours doesn't. You've deliberately removed every protection that would prevent this contract from becoming a noose around my neck. Calvin stood up. The pretense of friendship was gone entirely now. You're making a mistake, Callahan. This contract is the best deal you'll see this year. The railroad is coming whether you supply it or not. If you don't sign, someone else will. And when they do, you'll be competing against guaranteed railroad money with nothing but auction prices and hope. Everett stood up too. He was taller than Calvin by 4 inches, and when he drew himself to full height, the room seemed to shrink around the broker. I've built this my own judgment for 15 years, Marsh. I didn't get here by signing documents I didn't understand. You didn't understand it. She did. Calvin pointed at Amelia. You're taking business advice from a woman who couldn't get chosen at a bride auction. The words landed like a slap. But before Everett could respond, Amelia spoke. Her voice was quiet, calm, devastatingly controlled. Mr. Marsh, you came to this ranch expecting to negotiate with one person. A man who runs a large operation alone, who might be too busy or too proud to read the fine print. You did not expect me. And the fact that my presence upsets you tells me everything I need to know about the quality of your offer. She stood up and placed the contract on the desk. The answer is no. Calvin Marsh looked at Amelia, then at Everett, then back at Amelia. You'll regret this, he said. Possibly, Amelia replied. But I'd rather regret a missed opportunity than a signed trap. Calvin Marsh left Callahan Ridge Ranch that evening without a contract and without his dignity. His horse's hooves pounded the road back toward Helena, and every man on the ranch watched him go. The story of what happened in the office spread even faster than the Frank Moody incident. By the next morning, every worker on Callahan Ridge knew that the woman from the platform had just saved the ranch from a deal that could have cost them everything. Frank Moody, the same Frank who had called her the woman nobody wanted, found Amelia at the water pump the next morning. Miss Bennett, he said, hat in hand. Amelia looked at him. I owe you an apology. What I said last week about you being nobody, I was wrong. And what you did yesterday with that railroad man. He trailed off, searching for words. I've worked cattle ranches for 20 years. I've seen bosses sign bad deals because they were too stubborn to admit they didn't understand the terms. You didn't just read that contract, you saw through it. Amelia studied his face. The arrogance was gone. What remained was something rawer, something real. Thank you, Frank, she said. Now go check your supply numbers. I want last week's inventory on Everett's desk by noon. Frank almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. He walked away, and Amelia allowed herself one moment, just one, to feel the weight of what was happening. She was not just surviving anymore. She was becoming necessary. And that terrified her more than anything. That evening, Everett found Amelia sitting alone by the ranch river. The water moved slowly, carrying the last light of the day on its surface. She was sitting on a flat stone, her hands in her lap, staring at the current with an expression Everett had never seen on her face. Vulnerability. He sat down beside her without asking permission. They sat in silence for a long time. The kind of silence that exists between two people who have stopped needing words to communicate, but haven't yet found the courage to say the one thing that matters most. Amelia broke it. Everett. Yes. I need to know something. He turned to look at her. Her eyes were fixed on the water, but her hands were trembling in her lap. 9 men rejected me, she said. Her voice was steady, but barely. The effort of keeping it level was visible in the tension of her jaw, the stiffness of her shoulders. They all found reasons why I wasn't enough. Too old, too strong, too independent, too serious, too damaged, too much. She paused. The river moved. The world waited. Why did you choose me? Everett was quiet for a long time. Not the calculating silence of a man choosing his words carefully. The silence of a man reaching for something buried deep. Something true. Something that required more courage to say than any business decision he had ever made. Because those 9 men were searching for someone who had never been tested, he said. Amelia turned to look at him. They wanted a woman who hadn't been shaped by hard years. A woman who was still soft in the places where life hadn't pressed down yet. A woman who would follow without questioning, agree without challenging, and smile without needing a reason. He paused. I was searching for something different. I was searching for someone who already knew how to stand when life tried to knock her down. Someone who had been through the fire and came out carrying the lessons instead of the scars. Someone whose strength wasn't a theory, it was a fact. Tested, proven, unbreakable. Amelia's breath caught in her chest. They saw your difficult years and thought they were weaknesses. Everett continued. I saw them as proof. Proof of what? Proof that you were loyal. Because a woman who returns to that platform 9 times doesn't do it for attention. She does it because she believes, even when no one else does, that she deserves something real. He looked at her hands. Rough, calloused, scarred by years of work and weather and struggle. Proof that you were brave. Because standing up after being knocked down once takes courage. Standing up 9 times takes something deeper than courage, something most people don't have. And proof. He said, his voice dropping lower. That when things became difficult, and they will become difficult. Amelia, because that's what life does. You would not run. You would not break. You would plant your feet and face it the way you've faced everything else. Amelia felt tears burn behind her eyes. She fought them. She had spent years building walls against moments like this. Moments where someone's words reached the part of her she had locked away, the part that still needed to be told she was enough. Everett. I'm not finished. She went still. He turned his whole body toward her. He reached out and took her hands, both of them, and held them in his. I did not choose you because nobody else wanted you, he said. I chose you because nobody else was wise enough to recognize you. Amelia's walls broke. Not dramatically. Not with sobs or collapse. They broke the way ice breaks in spring, quietly from the inside, cracking along lines that had been forming for years, until the whole structure simply gave way, and the water rushed through. Tears ran down her face. She didn't wipe them. She didn't apologize for them. She let them fall because, for the first time in her adult life, she was crying not from pain, but from the overwhelming, almost unbearable relief of being truly understood. You don't know what those words mean, she whispered. I think I do, Everett said. Because I've been waiting 15 years to say them to the right person. And I would have waited 15 more. Amelia looked at this man, this stubborn, quiet, brilliant man, who had built an empire, and then had the humility to admit it was incomplete. And she felt something shift in the bedrock of who she was. Not a small shift. Not an adjustment. A transformation. The woman who had walked onto that platform 10 times, carrying nothing but a broken suitcase and a list of names that represented every person who had found her lacking. That woman was not gone. She would never be gone. Her scars were permanent. Her history was written. But in this moment, beside this river, holding the hands of a man who saw her failures as proof of her strength, Amelia Rose Bennett stopped being the woman nobody wanted. She became the woman one man was wise enough to choose. And that one man was enough. That one choice was enough. It had always been enough. She just needed someone brave enough to make it. They sat by the river until the last light disappeared, and the stars emerged one by one, like witnesses to a covenant that needed no church, no ceremony, no audience. Just 2 people who had spent their lives proving they could stand alone, finally admitting that standing together was not weakness. It was the bravest thing either of them had ever done. When they finally walked back toward the ranch house, Amelia stopped. Everett. Yes. Those 9 men. The ones who rejected me. What about them? Amelia looked at him with eyes that were clear and calm and absolutely certain. I forgive them. Every one of them. Because if any of them had said yes, I wouldn't be standing here. And there is nowhere in this world I would rather be. Everett Callahan looked at the woman beside him. This woman who had been dismissed and diminished and discarded by every person who should have seen her value. And he understood with the kind of certainty that only comes after a lifetime of searching that he had found exactly what he needed. Not a wife who would serve him. Not a partner who would agree with him. A woman who would stand beside him, not behind, not below, but beside, and make everything he had built stronger by the simple extraordinary act of being herself. He took her hand. They walked back to the ranch, and neither of them looked back. But what Amelia did not yet know, what she could not have anticipated in that moment of peace and certainty, was that the hardest test of her life was not behind her. It was waiting for her in the weeks ahead, wearing a familiar face and carrying a truth that would shake the foundation of everything she had just begun to build. Part 4. The storm that wore a familiar face. It was waiting for her in the weeks ahead, wearing a familiar face and carrying a truth that would shake the foundation of everything she had just begun to build. And it arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a man Amelia had never expected to see again. Walter Briggs. The ninth man. The one who had said she was a good woman but wanted an easier life. The one whose rejection had cut deeper than all the others because it wasn't born from cruelty. It was born from honesty. He rode into Callahan Ridge alone on a tired horse with dust on his coat and something desperate in his eyes. Amelia was crossing from the supply shed to the main house when she saw him dismount at the front gate. She stopped. Her body recognized him before her mind caught up a tightening in her chest, a coldness in her hands, the physical memory of a wound that had healed on the surface but still ached underneath. Walter saw her at the same moment. He froze. For 3 full seconds, they stood 30 feet apart, and the entire history of what he had done to her passed between them without a word. Then Walter removed his hat and said, "Miss Bennet." Amelia's voice came out steadier than she expected. "Mr. Briggs. I heard you were here, at Callahan's ranch. Word travels." "It does." He turned his hat in his hands, rotating it slowly, the way a man does when his hands need something to do because standing still feels impossible. "I didn't come for trouble." "Then why did you come?" Walter looked at her with those kind eyes, the same eyes that had once made her believe for one brief, foolish hour that someone might actually choose her. "I made a mistake," he said. Amelia felt the ground tilt beneath her. Not because the words surprised her, because she had imagined hearing them 1,000 times during the darkest nights after his rejection. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind, what she would say, how she would react, whether she would be gracious or cold or indifferent. But now that it was actually happening, she felt none of those things. She felt tired. "Come inside," she said. "I'll get you water." They sat in the main house kitchen. Walter drank 2 glasses of water without stopping. His hands were shaking, not from cold, from something else entirely. "Talk," Amelia said. Walter set down the glass. "After I left Silver Creek, I married a woman named Catherine. She was 22. Sweet. Quiet. Never questioned a thing I said. Never challenged me. Never pushed back." He paused. "I thought that was what I wanted. An easier life. A woman who would make things simple. And she left me 3 months ago. Packed her things, took the horse and rode to her sister's place in Billings. Left a note on the kitchen table that said, 'I can't love a man who doesn't need me to be anything.'" Amelia said nothing. She let the silence do the work. "I didn't understand what she meant," Walter continued. "Not at first. I thought she was ungrateful. I thought I'd given her everything, a home, stability, safety. What more did she want? She wanted to matter," Amelia said quietly. Walter looked at her as if she had reached inside his chest and pulled out the one truth he had been circling for months. "Yes," he whispered. "She wanted to matter. And I chose her specifically because she wouldn't demand that. Because she was easy. Because she was simple. Because she wasn't—" He stopped. "Because she wasn't me," Amelia finished. Walter's eyes filled with tears. He didn't wipe them. He sat there in Everett Callahan's kitchen and let them fall, and Amelia watched a man break apart in front of her, and felt something she never expected to feel toward the person who had hurt her most. Compassion. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Compassion was different from forgiveness. Compassion was seeing someone's pain without needing to fix it or punish it. Forgiveness was something deeper, something that required more time. "Why are you here, Walter?" she asked. "What do you actually want?" Walter wiped his face with the back of his hand. I wanted to tell you I was wrong. That day on the platform when I said I wanted an easier life, I was looking at the strongest woman I'd ever met and calling her strength a burden. I was too weak to stand beside someone like you, and instead of admitting that I blamed you for being too much. Amelia's jaw tightened. And now, what do you want now? Walter looked at her. And in his eyes, she saw the thing she had feared. The thing she had known was coming from the moment she recognized his horse at the gate. I want a second chance, he said. The kitchen fell silent. Amelia stared at him. Her heart hammered. Not with love, not with longing, with rage. Pure white-hot years in the making rage. Because this man who had held her heart in his hands for 1 hour and then dropped it because it was too heavy, was sitting in her kitchen asking her to pick it up and hand it back to him. After she had rebuilt everything. After she had found Everett. After she had earned her place on this ranch through sweat and intelligence and sheer relentless refusal to quit. Now he wanted a second chance. No, Amelia said. Walter flinched. Not because I hate you, Walter, I don't. But because the woman you rejected was not the same woman sitting in front of you right now. You rejected Amelia Bennett, the farm woman who had lost everything. The woman in front of you is Amelia Bennett, who helped save a 12,000-acre ranch from a predatory railroad contract. Who caught a supply thief. Who earned the respect of 27 men who didn't want her here. Who found a partner who saw her strength as the reason to choose her, not the reason to run. She leaned forward. You want an easier life, Walter. I was never going to give you that. But what I would have given you was a real life. A full life. A life that meant something. And you traded that for comfort. Walter sat motionless. His tears had stopped. What remained on his face was something worse than sadness. Recognition. The recognition that he was not looking at a missed opportunity. He was looking at a woman who had grown beyond him. A woman who no longer fit in the small safe space he had tried to put her in. You're right, he said softly. You're absolutely right. He stood up. He placed his hat on his head. He looked at Amelia one final time. He's a lucky man, Walter said. Callahan. I hope he knows that. He does, Amelia said, because he's the kind of man who recognizes what he has instead of running from it. Walter nodded. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, Miss Bennett, I'm sorry. Not because I lost you. Because I was too small to deserve you. Then he walked out of Callahan Ridge Ranch and rode south, and Amelia sat alone in the kitchen and pressed her palms flat against the table and breathed until the shaking stopped. She did not cry. She had no tears left for Walter Briggs. She had used them all up a long time ago. But Amelia's trial was not over. Because Walter Briggs was only the face. The truth he carried, the real earthquake, was still coming. It arrived through Everett. He had seen Walter's horse at the gate. He had watched from the barn as the man entered the main house. He had not intervened because he trusted Amelia to handle whatever came through that door. But trust and fear are not mutually exclusive. A man can trust a woman completely and still be terrified of losing her. That evening, Everett found Amelia in the office. She was reviewing the monthly accounts as if nothing had happened. Her face was composed. Her hands were steady. Every number in the ledger received her full attention. But Everett knew her well enough now to see what she was hiding. Who was he? Everett asked from the doorway. Amelia didn't look up. You know who he was. I know his name. I don't know what he was to you. Amelia set down her pen. She looked at Everett, really looked at him, and saw something she had never seen in his face before. Doubt. Not doubt in her. Doubt in himself. The fear of a man who had spent 15 years alone and was now wondering if the woman he chose might still want the one who rejected her. It broke Amelia's heart, because she recognized that fear. She had lived inside it for years. The fear that you are not enough. The fear that someone better will come along and prove what you always suspected about yourself, that you are temporary, replaceable, a placeholder until the real thing arrives. Everett, sit down. He sat across from her. His jaw was tight. His hands rested on the desk, but his fingers were pressing hard against the wood. Walter Briggs was the 9th man who rejected me, Amelia said. He was the one who said I was a good woman, but he wanted an easier life. Everett said nothing. His eyes didn't leave her face. He came here today to tell me he made a mistake, that his marriage failed, that he wants a second chance. The muscles in Everett's jaw flexed. His knuckles went white against the desk. And what did you tell him? His voice was controlled. Too controlled. The voice of a man holding himself together through sheer force of will. I told him no. Everett's hands relaxed, just slightly, but his eyes were still guarded. Why? Amelia leaned forward. Are you asking why I said no because you want to understand my reasoning? Or are you asking because you need to hear me say that I choose you? The question hit Everett like a physical blow. His composure cracked just for a moment, just enough for Amelia to see the raw, unguarded fear underneath. Both, he said. Amelia stood up. She walked around the desk. She stood directly in front of Everett Callahan and looked down at a man who had built an empire through strength and discipline and iron, while a man who was in this moment as vulnerable as she had ever seen another human being. Walter Briggs rejected me because my strength frightened him, she said. You chose me because my strength was exactly what you were looking for. That is not a small difference, Everett. That is everything. She reached out and placed her hand on his. I did not say no to Walter because I had no other option. I said no because I have already found the only man in Montana who understands that a woman's hard years are not a warning. They are a qualification. Everett looked at her hand on his. Then he looked up at her face. I have never been afraid of losing anything in my life, he said quietly. Not money, not land, not cattle. But when I saw that man ride in today, I felt something I haven't felt since I was a boy watching my father's ranch burn down. What? Terror. The terror of watching something precious stand close to the edge and knowing that if it falls, you can't rebuild it. Amelia squeezed his hand. I'm not going anywhere, Everett. Not because I have nowhere else to go, because there is nowhere else I want to be. Everett turned his hand over and held hers. His grip was firm. His fingers were calloused. And in that grip, Amelia felt something she had spent her entire adult life searching for. Safety. Not the safety of walls and locked doors. The safety of being held by someone who would rather break his own hand than let go. They stayed like that for a long time. Two people who had spent their lives proving they didn't need anyone holding hands in a dimly lit office, admitting through touch what words couldn't fully carry. But the fallout from Walter's visit was not contained to Everett and Amelia. Word got out. Because word always gets out. Someone in town had seen Walter Briggs riding toward Callahan Ridge. Someone else had seen him ride away 2 hours later with red eyes and a broken expression. And within days the gossip reached Silver Creek like a brush fire. Margaret Hollis was predictably the first to fan the flames. The 9th man came back for her. Margaret told anyone who would listen at the general store. Rode all the way to Callahan's ranch, begged her to take him back. And, asked the shopkeeper. She turned him down flat. The woman who got rejected 9 times is now turning men away. Margaret shook her head. I don't know whether that's justice or madness. Maybe it's neither, said old Ben Crawford, who happened to be buying nails. Maybe it's just a woman who finally knows what she's worth. Margaret looked at Ben with an expression caught between irritation and grudging respect. You've always had a soft spot for that girl, Ben. It's not softness, Margaret. It's paying attention. Something this town has never been particularly good at. The gossip might have faded on its own, if not for what happened next. Calvin Marsh returned. Not to Callahan Ridge, to Silver Creek. And he didn't come alone. He arrived with a lawyer from Helena named Richard Pruitt, a thin, precise man with spectacles and a briefcase full of documents. They set up in the back room of Silver Creek's only hotel and began holding meetings. Private meetings. With ranchers. With suppliers. With anyone who did business with Callahan Ridge Ranch. Jack Dawson was the first to notice. He rode into Silver Creek for supplies and saw Calvin Marsh's horse tied outside the hotel. He asked around. learned about the meetings, rode back to the ranch and went straight to Everett. "Marsh is back," Jack said, walking into the office where Everett and Amelia were working side by side. "He's got a lawyer with him. They're meeting with Henderson, your grain supplier, and Tom Keller, and the McDowell brothers." Amelia's hands went still over the ledger she was reviewing. "What kind of meetings?" Everett asked. "The kind that happen behind closed doors with a man who has a grudge against this ranch." Everett stood up slowly. "He's trying to squeeze us out. He's trying to turn your suppliers against you," Amelia said. Her mind was already racing, already calculating, already 3 steps ahead. "If Henderson raises grain prices or refuses to sell to us, if Keller stops supplying lumber for fencing, if the McDowell brothers pull their seasonal labor, he doesn't need a contract to hurt this ranch. He just needs to cut off the supply chain." Jack looked at Amelia with an expression that had evolved considerably since their first confrontation, something that was now unmistakably respect. "Can he do that?" Jack asked. "He can try," Amelia said. "The question is whether our suppliers are more afraid of Marsh or more loyal to Callahan." "Money beats loyalty," Jack said grimly. "Sometimes," Amelia agreed. "But not always. Not when the person asking for loyalty has treated people fairly for 15 years. Everett paced the length of the office. His face was hard. His fists were clenched. This was the side of Everett that Amelia had not seen before the fighter. The man who had built an empire not just through patience and intelligence, but through a fierce, unyielding refusal to be defeated. "I'll ride into Silver Creek myself," Everett said. "I'll talk to Henderson, to Keller, to the McDowells. I'll remind them who has been buying their goods and paying their bills for the last 15 years. "No," Amelia said. Both men turned to look at her. "If you ride in there, you look desperate. You look like a man whose position is threatened. Marsh wants that. He wants to see you scramble." "Then what do you suggest?" Amelia thought for a moment. "Send me." Everett's eyebrows rose. "You? Henderson has never met me. Neither has Keller. Neither have the McDowells. I'm not Everett Callahan. I'm not the ranch owner coming to defend his territory. I'm a woman with a head for numbers and no emotional history with any of them. I can walk into those meetings and do what you can't. Which is, listen, without pride getting in the way, without 15 years of history clouding the conversation. I can find out exactly what Marsh is offering them and exactly what it would take to keep them loyal." Jack let out a low whistle. "She's got a point, Mr. Callahan." Everett looked at Amelia. His expression was unreadable, but behind his eyes she could see the war, the instinct to protect clashing with the recognition that she was right. "This is my fight," he said. "It's our fight," Amelia corrected. "That's what partner means." The silence stretched. Then Everett nodded. Once. Firmly. "Take Jack with you. Not for protection. For credibility. The suppliers know him." Agreed. Amelia and Jack rode into Silver Creek the next morning. Their first stop was Henderson's grain supply. Old Henderson was 60 years old, bald, cautious, and had been selling grain to Callahan Ridge since before Amelia was born. He sat behind his counter with the nervous energy of a man caught between 2 forces he couldn't control. "I know why you're here," Henderson said before Amelia could speak. "Then let's not waste each other's time," Amelia replied. "What did Marsh offer you?" Henderson glanced at Jack, who stood by the door with his arms folded. "He offered me a 5-year exclusive supply contract with the railroad camps, double the volume I sell to Callahan, triple the revenue." "And the conditions?" Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "I stopped selling to Callahan Ridge." Amelia nodded slowly. "So he's not just offering you a better deal. He's asking you to destroy a 15-year business relationship in exchange for a promise from a man you've never worked with before. He's got railroad money behind him, Miss Bennett. That's not a promise. That's a guarantee." "There are no guarantees in business, Mr. Henderson. There are only track records. Everett Callahan has paid you on time every month for 15 years. He has never once disputed an invoice, never once delayed a payment, never once threatened to take his business elsewhere. Can Calvin Marsh say the same?" Henderson was quiet. "And here's something else to consider," Amelia continued. That railroad contract Marsh offered Callahan, the one he turned down, contained a penalty clause that would have bankrupted the ranch within 3 bad months. That's the kind of businessman Calvin Marsh is. He doesn't build partnerships, he builds traps. Henderson's face changed. The nervousness didn't disappear, but something harder emerged beneath it. The instinct of a man who has survived in business long enough to recognize a predator. "I didn't know about the penalty clause," Henderson said. "Most people don't, until it's too late." Henderson looked at Jack. "Is she telling the truth?" Jack nodded. "Every word. I was there when she caught it in the contract. Page 17. Mr. Callahan nearly signed it before she stopped him." Henderson sat back in his chair. He rubbed his jaw. He looked at Amelia with the careful, evaluating gaze of a man recalculating his position. "I'll think about it," he said. "Think quickly, Mr. Henderson, because Marsh isn't going to wait. And once you sign with him, you're in his world, and his world has penalty clauses." They left Henderson staring at his counter, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Tom Keller was easier. He was a lumberman, practical, direct, allergic to complications. When Amelia explained what Marsh was doing, Keller's reaction was immediate. "I don't deal with middlemen from Helena," Keller said. "I've known Callahan for 12 years. He's never done me wrong. Tell that railroad man to go back where he came from." "Can I tell Mr. Callahan you'll put that in writing?" Keller grinned. "I'll write it myself. In charcoal on the back of a plank if I have to." The McDowell brothers were more complicated. They were young, barely 30, and the promise of railroad money had their eyes wide. But Amelia spent an hour with them, walking through the numbers, showing them how a 5-year exclusive contract with a volatile industry like railroad construction could collapse if the railroad changed routes, ran out of funding, or simply found cheaper suppliers elsewhere. "Callahan buys from you because he needs you," Amelia told them. "The railroad would buy from you because it's convenient. The moment it's not convenient, you're gone." The older McDowell brother James looked at his younger brother Patrick. "She's making sense," James said. Patrick hesitated. "But the money." "Money you can't count on is worse than money you can," Amelia said. "I know that from personal experience. I lost a farm because I trusted a promise instead of a pattern." The brothers exchanged another look. Then James extended his hand. "Tell Callahan we're staying," he said. Amelia shook his hand. Then Patrick's. By the time she and Jack rode back to Callahan Ridge that evening, she had secured 3 of the 4 suppliers. Henderson was still undecided, but the others were firm. Jack rode beside her in silence for most of the journey. Then, as the ranch came into view, he said something Amelia didn't expect. "You know what you did today, Miss Bennett? I talked to 3 businessmen. No, you saved this ranch, again, without raising your voice, without threatening anyone, without Everett's name, or Everett's money, or Everett's reputation. You walked in there as Amelia Bennett, and that was enough." Amelia looked at him. It wasn't enough for 9 men on a platform. Jack held her gaze. "Then those 9 men were blind, and I say that as someone who was nearly blind myself." They rode the rest of the way in silence. But it was the kind of silence that means something, the silence of mutual respect between 2 people who had started as adversaries and ended as something neither of them had a word for. When they arrived at the ranch, Everett was waiting, not in the office, not in the barn. Howe was standing at the gate, watching the road. The way a man watches when the person he cares about is out in the world and he can't protect them, and the only thing he can do is wait and hope and trust. Amelia dismounted and walked toward him. "Henderson is thinking," she said. "Keller is solid. The McDowells are with us." Everett nodded. But he didn't ask about the details. He didn't ask about the numbers, or the negotiations, or the strategy. He asked, "Are you all right?" And in those 3 words, Amelia heard everything. The fear he had carried all day, the pride he felt in her, the love he had not yet spoken aloud, but that lived in every decision he made and every question he asked. "I'm all right," she said. "Good." He took the reins of her horse. "There's food in the kitchen. Jack, you too." Jack tipped his hat and walked toward the bunkhouse. but he paused and looked back over his shoulder at Amelia and Everett standing together at the gate, and he smiled to himself, a private knowing smile, and kept walking. 3 days later, Henderson sent word. He was staying with Callahan Ridge. Calvin Marsh's power play had failed. Every supplier he had tried to turn had held firm. The supply chain was intact. The ranch was secure. But Amelia knew that Marsh would not simply disappear. Men like Calvin Marsh didn't accept defeat. They buried it and waited for it to become something useful. She was right. 2 weeks after the supplier meetings, a letter arrived at Callahan Ridge. It was addressed to Everett, but Amelia opened it because Everett was out riding fence lines, and she handled all correspondence now. The letter was from the Territorial Land Office in Helena. It stated that a formal challenge had been filed against Callahan Ridge Ranch's original land deed. The challenge claimed that a portion of the ranch's eastern boundary, approximately 2,000 acres, had been improperly surveyed and legally belonged to an entity called Western Montana Development Company. Amelia read the letter twice. Her hands were steady, but her heart was hammering. She knew what this was. She pulled the ranch's deed files from the office safe. She spread them across the desk. She cross-referenced the original survey with the territorial maps. She checked the boundary markers, the legal descriptions, the chain of title going back to Everett's father. It took her 4 hours. When Everett returned that evening, she was waiting for him in the office with every document laid out in precise order. "We have a problem," she said. Everett read the letter. His face went stone cold. "Western Montana Development Company," he said. "That's Marsh." "Almost certainly. The company was incorporated 3 weeks ago. The timing matches perfectly." "Can he win?" Amelia pointed to the survey documents. The original survey from 1871 has an ambiguity in the eastern boundary description. It references a creek bed that shifted course after a flood in 1879. The current boundary follows the old creek bed. The new creek bed is about a quarter-mile east. If Marsh's lawyers argue that the legal boundary should follow the current creek bed, he could claim 2,000 acres of your best grazing land. Everett sank into his chair. For the first time since Amelia had known him, he looked overwhelmed. 2,000 acres, he said. "We won't let him take it," Amelia said. Everett looked at her. "How?" "The original deed references the creek bed as it existed at the time of survey. That means the 1871 position, not the current one. If we can find the original surveyor's notes, the field measurements, the witness markers, the physical reference points, we can prove the boundary was set based on where the creek was not where it is now. Those notes would be 50 years old. They could be anywhere. They could be at the Territorial Land Office. They could be in your father's personal records. They could be in a filing cabinet nobody has opened since 1871. Amelia's voice was hard, focused. The voice of a woman who had spent her life fighting losing battles and knew exactly how to fight one more. "But they exist. Records don't disappear, Everett. They just get forgotten. And I am very good at finding things other people forget." Everett stood up. He walked to her. He placed both hands on her shoulders and looked directly into her eyes. "I built this ranch with my hands," he said. "Every fence post, every water line, every acre. And a man from Helena with a briefcase and a grudge thinks he can take it because a creek changed course 50 years ago. He thinks he can take it because he doesn't know who he's fighting," Amelia said. "He thinks he's fighting Everett Callahan, a rancher who works alone. He doesn't know about me. He doesn't know that the woman he dismissed in that office, the one he called a bride auction reject, is the one who's going to tear his case apart." Everett's grip on her shoulders tightened. Not with force, with something deeper. Something that felt like a man anchoring himself to the one person he trusted to hold the line. "Then tear it apart," he said. Amelia nodded. "I will." She started that night. She pulled every document from the ranch safe, every deed, every tax record, every letter Everett's father had ever filed with the territory. She organized them chronologically. She cross-referenced dates. She traced the chain of ownership from the original homestead claim through every expansion, every purchase, every legal filing. She worked through the night, through the next day, through the day after that. Jack brought her coffee. Billy Dawes brought her food. Even old Theodore the cook appeared at the office door at midnight with a plate of biscuits and a look of quiet concern. "You need to sleep, ma'am," Theodore said. "I'll sleep when I find what I'm looking for." Theodore set down the plate and walked away shaking his head. But there was something in his eyes, something that looked unmistakably like admiration. On the third day, Amelia found it, buried in a stack of papers that hadn't been touched in decades. Papers that had been stored in a trunk in the ranch's root cellar. Papers that smelled of dust and age, and the ghost of a man who had been dead for 20 years. Amelia found the original surveyor's field notes from 1871, handwritten, detailed, precise, and on page 14, in ink that had faded but not disappeared, was the critical passage, a physical description of the eastern boundary that referenced not just the creek bed, but 3 permanent stone markers that the surveyor had placed along the line. Markers that would still be there. Because stone doesn't move the way creeks do. Amelia held those papers in her hands and felt something surge through her body. Not triumph, not yet, but the fierce electric certainty of a woman who has just found the weapon she needs to win a war. She carried the papers to the main house. She laid them on the kitchen table in front of Everett, who had barely slept in 3 days himself. "Page 14, she said. Everett read it. His hands began to shake. "Stone markers," he whispered. 3 of them, along the eastern boundary, if they're still in the ground and stone markers don't rot. Everett, then the boundary is fixed, regardless of where the creek moved. Marsh's entire case collapses. Everett looked up at her. His eyes were red from sleeplessness. His face was drawn. But underneath the exhaustion, something blazed, something fierce and proud and overwhelmingly grateful. "You found this," he said, "in 3 days, in a trunk that's been in the cellar since my father died. I told you, I'm good at finding things people forget." Everett stood up. He came around the table, and he did something he had never done before. He pulled Amelia into his arms and held her. Not gently, not politely. The way a man holds the person who just saved everything he has, desperately, completely, with the full weight of his body, and his fear and his relief pressing against her. Amelia stood rigid for 1 second. 2 seconds. Her arms hung at her sides. Every instinct she had built over 9 rejections and years of self-protection told her to hold back, to keep the wall up, to protect the last fragile piece of herself that still feared this would all be taken away. Then she let go. She wrapped her arms around Everett Callahan and held him back. And in that embrace, standing in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, surrounded by 50-year-old documents and cold coffee and the remnants of Theodore's biscuits, Amelia rose. Bennett felt the last wall inside her crumble. Not fall. Crumble. The way a wall crumbles when it is no longer needed, when the thing it was protecting is finally safe. "We're going to win this," she whispered against his chest. Everett held her tighter. "We already have." And in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of a dead man's careful surveying and a living woman's relentless determination, neither of them doubted it. But winning the legal battle was only half the war. The other half, the half that would test Amelia in ways she could never have prepared for, was waiting in a courtroom in Helena, where Calvin Marsh sat across a table with a lawyer who had one last card to play. And that card had Amelia's name on it. Part 5. The woman who stood and the world that finally saw. And that card had Amelia's name on it, written in ink that smelled of desperation and the particular cruelty of a man who, having failed to destroy a ranch, decided to destroy the woman protecting it instead. The hearing was set for a Thursday in Helena. The Territorial Land Office had scheduled it 3 weeks out, giving both parties time to prepare their cases. Everett hired a lawyer, a steady, experienced man named Howard Clement, who had handled land disputes in Montana for 20 years. But from the first meeting, it was clear that Howard Clement's most valuable resource was not his legal knowledge. It was Amelia. She brought the surveyor's field notes. She brought the boundary maps. She brought 15 years of tax records showing that Callahan Ridge had paid taxes on the disputed 2,000 acres without interruption. She brought the chain of title. She brought the deed. Howard Clement spread the documents across his office table and looked at Amelia the way a carpenter looks at a perfectly joined corner with professional admiration. "Miss Bennett, Where did you learn to organize a case like this? I didn't learn it anywhere. I learned it from losing. When my family's farm went under, I spent 6 months going through every document, every receipt, every letter, trying to find something, anything that could save it. I was too late for the farm, but I learned how paper works, how records tell stories that people forget, how the truth hides in the details that nobody bothers to read. Howard nodded slowly. Well, the truth you found here is solid. The stone markers are the key. If they're still in the ground, Marsh's case has no foundation. They're in the ground, Amelia said. I sent Jack Dawson and 2 men to verify. All 3 markers are exactly where the 1871 survey placed them. Untouched. Unmoved. Then we win. Unless Marsh has something else. Howard looked at her. What do you mean? I mean, Calvin Marsh is not a stupid man. He filed this challenge knowing we would find the deed, knowing we might find the survey. He's not relying on the land claim to win. He's relying on something else, something we haven't seen yet. Howard frowned. You think there's another angle? I think a man who embeds penalty clauses on page 17 of a contract doesn't walk into a courtroom with only one strategy. Howard Clement leaned back in his chair and studied Amelia with new eyes. You're not just organized, Miss Bennett. You think like a litigator. I think like a woman who's been blindsided too many times to assume the first punch is the last one. She was right. The morning of the hearing. Amelia Everett and Howard arrived at the Territorial Land Office in Helena. Calvin Marsh was already there, seated at a long table with his lawyer, Richard Pruitt. Pruitt was thin, precise, and radiated the quiet confidence of a man who had prepared something his opponents hadn't anticipated. Amelia noticed it immediately. The way Pruitt's hands rested calmly on his briefcase. The way his eyes moved to her, not to Everett, not to Howard, but to her, as if she was the target. Her stomach tightened. The hearing officer was a man named Judge William Cartwright, not technically a judge, but a territorial arbitrator with the authority to settle land disputes. He was 63, gray-bearded, and had the weary patience of someone who had listened to men argue about property lines for longer than he cared to remember. This hearing concerns a boundary challenge filed by Western Montana Development Company against the Callahan Ridge Ranch. Cartwright began. Mr. Pruitt, you represent the challenger. Mr. Clement, you represent the respondent. Present your cases. Pruitt stood first. His voice was measured, almost pleasant. He laid out the challenge methodically, the shifted creek bed, the ambiguous boundary description, the claim that 2,000 acres of Callahan's eastern range legally belonged to Western Montana Development. It was a competent presentation, professional, thorough, and completely predictable. Howard Clement responded with Amelia's evidence, the original surveyor's field notes, the stone markers, the tax records, the unbroken chain of title. He laid it out piece by piece, building a wall of documentation that should have ended the hearing in 30 minutes. Cartwright listened. He reviewed the documents. He compared the survey notes to the territorial maps. His expression shifted gradually from neutral to skeptical of Marsh's claim. Mr. Pruitt, Cartwright said, the stone markers appear to settle the boundary question definitively. The original survey references permanent physical markers, not the creek bed. Unless you have evidence that these markers were placed incorrectly or moved. I don't challenge the markers, Your Honor, Pruitt said calmly. The room went quiet. Amelia's hands gripped the edge of her chair. I challenge the standing of the person who prepared the respondent's case. Howard Clement stood up. Objection. The case was prepared by legal counsel myself. The case was organized, researched, and assembled by Miss Amelia Rose Bennett, Pruitt said, turning to face Amelia directly. A woman who is neither a licensed attorney nor a legal representative of Callahan Ridge Ranch. A woman who, according to territorial records, has no legal standing in relation to the ranch. She is not an owner, not a registered partner, not a spouse. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Everett's jaw clenched. Howard looked stunned. Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. Pruitt continued, his voice smooth and relentless. Furthermore, I would like to enter into the record that Miss Bennett has a documented history of financial failure. Her family's farm, the Bennett homestead in Silver Creek, was foreclosed by First Montana Bank in 1882 due to unpaid debts. The foreclosure records indicate mismanagement of loan obligations and failure to maintain viable agricultural operations. That's a lie, Amelia said, her voice cutting through the room before she could stop it. Cartwright held up his hand. Miss Bennett, you are not a party to this hearing. Please refrain from. The farm failed because of 3 consecutive drought years and a predatory loan taken out by my father before I was old enough to manage the finances. The foreclosure was not due to mismanagement. It was due to circumstances beyond anyone's control. Pruitt smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Regardless of the cause, the record speaks for itself. Miss Bennett's financial history demonstrates a pattern of failure. And this woman with no legal standing and a history of insolvency, is the one Mr. Callahan has entrusted with the financial and operational management of a 12,000-acre ranch. He turned to Cartwright. Your Honor, I'm not arguing that the boundary evidence is fraudulent. I'm arguing that the respondent's case was prepared by an unqualified individual with a compromised financial history, and that the integrity of the evidence chain should be examined accordingly. Howard Clement was on his feet. This is outrageous. The evidence stands on its own merits regardless of who compiled it. Stone markers don't change because of who found them. The evidence may stand, Pruitt conceded, but the credibility of the person presenting it is relevant to this proceeding. If Miss Bennett has access to the ranch's financial records, legal documents, and operational systems, without any formal authority or legal accountability, that raises questions about the governance of Callahan Ridge Ranch. Questions that could affect future claims, future contracts, and future disputes. Amelia understood what was happening. Marsh couldn't win the land claim. So he was doing something worse. He was attacking her personally. He was using her past, her failures, her losses, her lack of legal standing to undermine not just this case, but her entire position at the ranch. He was trying to make Everett question whether having her involved was a liability rather than an asset. And the worst part was, some of it was true. She was not Everett's wife. She was not a registered partner. She had no legal authority over the ranch. If something happened to Everett, if he was injured, if he died, if a creditor came calling, Amelia had no standing, no protection, no claim. She was in the eyes of the law exactly what Pruitt said she was. Nobody. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She sat in that chair and felt the familiar weight of inadequacy press down on her, the same weight she had carried on the platform, the same weight that 9 men's rejections had piled on her shoulders one by one. For a moment, one terrible paralyzing moment, she was back on that platform, standing alone, watching another man decide she wasn't enough. Then Everett stood up. Howard tried to stop him. Mr. Callahan, let me handle. Sit down, Howard. Howard sat. Everett James Callahan stood at his full height and looked directly at Judge Cartwright, with the calm, measured authority of a man who had spent 44 years learning when to speak and when to remain silent, and knew that this was the moment that required words. Your Honor, I'd like to address Mr. Pruitt's statements. Cartwright nodded. Go ahead, Mr. Callahan. Miss Amelia Bennett came to my ranch 6 weeks ago with nothing but a broken suitcase and more courage than any person I have ever met. In those 6 weeks, she has identified financial discrepancies that cost my operation thousands of dollars. She has caught a supply thief. She has reorganized my record-keeping system. She has negotiated with my suppliers to protect the ranch's supply chain against the very man sitting across this table. And she found the 1871 surveyor's field notes in a trunk that had been in my cellar for 20 years that prove this land challenge is baseless. He paused. Mr. Pruitt calls her unqualified. I call her the most capable person I have ever worked with. Mr. Pruitt cites her family's farm foreclosure as evidence of failure. I cite it as evidence of survival. She lost everything and built herself back up with nothing but her mind and her will. That is not a liability. That is exactly the kind of person I want managing my ranch. He turned to look at Pruitt. And as for her legal standing, you're right. She has none. That is my failure, not hers. And it's one I intend to correct. He turned back to Cartwright. I have nothing further. The room was silent. Cartwright looked at Everett, then at Amelia, then at Calvin Marsh, who was sitting very still with the expression of a man watching his strategy crumble in real time. "Mr. Pruitt," Cartwright said slowly, "the question before this hearing is whether the boundary challenge has merit. Based on the surveyor's field notes, the confirmed stone markers, and the unbroken tax and title records, I find that it does not. The challenge is denied." He set down his pen. "As for your arguments regarding Miss Bennett's qualifications and standing, those are matters of personal business arrangement, not territorial jurisdiction. I would advise you to focus on the law, rather than the character of the people you're opposing. This hearing is concluded." Pruitt's face went white. Calvin Marsh stood up so abruptly, his chair scraped against the floor. He looked at Amelia with an expression that mixed fury and something else, the grudging recognition of a man who has been outmaneuvered by someone he underestimated. He said nothing. He picked up his briefcase. He walked out. Richard Pruitt followed. The door closed behind them. Howard Clement exhaled like a man surfacing from deep water. Well, that was not how I expected this morning to go." Amelia sat motionless. Her hands were in her lap. Her face was still, but inside she was shaking, not with fear, not with relief, but with the overwhelming force of what Everett had just done. He had stood up in a public hearing and declared her value, not by defending her from the accusations, by stating plainly and without qualification that she was the best thing that had ever happened to his ranch. And then he had said something else, something she was still processing. "As for her legal standing, that is my failure, not hers, and it's one I intend to correct." Amelia looked at Everett. He was standing by the window, his back to the room, his hands in his pockets. The posture of a man who had just done something enormous and was giving her space to absorb it. "Everett." He turned. "What did you mean?" He walked toward her. He knelt beside her chair. He took her hands in his, the same rough, calloused hands that had built a ranch from nothing and held her in a kitchen at 3 in the morning and trembled on a coffee cup when Walter Briggs rode through his gate. "I meant that I should have done this weeks ago," he said. "I asked you to be my partner, but I gave you the work without the protection, the responsibility without the standing. I let you fight for this ranch without making sure this ranch would fight for you." "Everett, I didn't ask for. I know you didn't ask. That's exactly why you deserve it. Amelia, I am asking you to marry me, not because I need a wife, not because the ranch needs a legal partner, because I need you, all of you, your mind, your courage, your stubbornness, your impossibly sharp eye for numbers. Every scar and every battle and every morning you woke up and decided to keep going when anyone else would have quit." His voice broke, just slightly, just enough to reveal the fault line underneath all that strength. "I have spent 15 years alone, Amelia. 15 years telling myself I didn't need anyone. And in 6 weeks you proved me wrong in every way a person can be proved wrong. You didn't just change my ranch. You changed me. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the woman who came back a 10th time when the whole world told her to stop." Amelia looked at him through tears she no longer tried to hide. "You were worthy the moment you walked past every other woman on that platform and stopped in front of me," she said. "You were worthy when you didn't ask my age or check my hands or calculate whether I was young enough or pretty enough or easy enough. You were worthy when you asked me why I came back and actually listened to the answer." She squeezed his hands. "Yes, Everett, the answer is yes. It has been yes since the moment you said my honesty was the first real thing you'd heard in years." Everett pressed his forehead against their joined hands. His shoulders shook. Not with sobs. Everett Callahan was not a man who sobbed, but with the release of something held too long. 15 years of solitude. 15 years of control. 15 years of building walls to protect a heart that had been waiting without knowing it for a woman strong enough to break through. Howard Clement quietly excused himself from the room. He closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway of the Territorial Land Office with a handkerchief pressed to his eyes, and when a clerk asked if he was all right, he said, "I'm fine. I just watched the bravest woman in Montana receive what she's deserved her entire life." The ride back to Silver Creek was different from any ride Amelia had ever taken, not because the road had changed. Not because the territory looked different, but because she was different. The woman who rode south toward Callahan Ridge that afternoon carried the same rough hands, the same sharp mind, the same memories of 9 rejections, but she carried them differently now, not as burdens, as credentials. When they reached Silver Creek, word had already spread. It always did. Margaret Hollis was standing outside the general store when Everett and Amelia rode through. She watched them pass with an expression that had evolved considerably from the first time she had watched Amelia walk to the bride platform. "Well," Margaret said to the woman beside her, "I suppose I was wrong about her." Old Ben Crawford, leaning against the hitching post nearby, raised an eyebrow. Did Margaret Hollis just admit she was wrong about something? Somebody mark the calendar. Margaret shot him a look, but it softened almost immediately. She's tougher than I gave her credit for, Ben. I'll say that much. She's tougher than anyone in this town gave her credit for, including the 9 men who walked away from her. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you think she's happy?" Bun watched Amelia ride, passed back straight, chin high. Her hand resting on the saddle horn with the easy confidence of a woman who had finally stopped fighting for permission to exist. "I think she's more than happy, Margaret. I think she's free." The wedding took place 3 weeks later at Callahan Ridge Ranch. It was small, quiet. No grand ceremony, no elaborate preparations. Just the ranch hands, a few people from town, a traveling minister, and 2 people standing face to face who had spent their entire lives being told in different ways, for different reasons, that they would always be alone. Jack Dawson served as Everett's witness. He stood beside his boss with his hat in his hands and his jaw tight and his eyes suspiciously bright, and when the minister asked for the ring, Jack produced it from his vest pocket with hands that were steady even though the rest of him was not. Billy Dawes stood in the back row and cried openly without shame, and when Frank Moody elbowed him and whispered, "Pull yourself together," Billy said, "You pull yourself together, Frank. I saw your lip trembling during the vows." Theodore the cook had prepared a feast, not because anyone asked him to, because that was how Theodore expressed everything he could not say, with words, through food, through labor, through the quiet devotion of a man who had watched a stranger become family. Dorothy the widow, from the bride platform, now married to the widower. Samuel had come with her stepchildren. She found Amelia before the ceremony and held her hands and said simply, "You waited, and it was worth it." Amelia squeezed Dorothy's fingers. "So did you." After the ceremony, after the food, after the toasts, and the laughter, and the handshakes, and the tears, Amelia stood alone for a moment at the edge of the ranch property. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The list. 9 names on one side, 5 words on the other. "Their rejection is not my truth." She read the names one final time. Douglas Parnell, who asked her age and walked away. Thomas Greer, who wanted a servant, not a partner. The 3rd man who never even spoke to her. The 4th who blamed her for hardship that wasn't her fault. The 5th who wanted someone who hadn't been through so much. The 6th who said she was too serious. Hank Morrison, who said she was too difficult to reach. The 8th who wanted someone younger. Walter Briggs, who wanted an easier life. 9 men. 9 judgments. 9 closed doors, and behind every closed door a redirect, a rerouting, a path that bent away from what she thought she wanted and toward what she actually needed. Amelia folded the paper. She held it in her hands for a long moment. Then she walked to the ranch fire pit, where the last embers of the evening celebration still glowed. She placed the paper on the coals. It caught slowly. The edges curled. The names darkened, then disappeared. The 5 words on the back, "Their rejection is not my truth," held the longest, as if the fire itself recognized their importance and wanted to give them one final moment before letting them go. Then they were gone. Amelia watched the last wisp of smoke rise and disappear. She didn't need the list anymore. She didn't need to carry the names of men who had failed to see her, because one man had seen her. One man had chosen her. And in that single choice, every rejection, every humiliation, Every night, she had spent staring at a wall, wondering if she would ever be enough. All of it found its meaning. Not as punishment, not as proof of her inadequacy, as preparation. Every hard year had trained her for the ranch. Every rejection had strengthened her for the courtroom. Every night of doubt had built the resilience she needed to stand in front of Calvin Marsh and tear his case apart without raising her voice. She had not been broken by those 9 years of rejection. She had been forged by them. Everett found her standing by the fire pit. He walked up beside her. Not in front, not above. Beside her. "What was that?" he asked, nodding toward the dying embers. "The past. You burned it. I released it. There's a difference." Everett smiled. That small, quiet smile she had first seen on the platform. The one that held no charm, no performance, no agenda. Just recognition. Just the smile of a man looking at the only person in the world who made complete sense to him. "Mrs. Callahan," he said. Amelia felt the name settle over her like armor. Not the heavy kind. The kind that fits so perfectly you forget you're wearing it. "Mr. Callahan," she replied. "Welcome home." 2 words, 13 letters. A lifetime of meaning. Welcome home. Not welcome to my ranch. Not welcome to my life. Welcome home. As if the home had been waiting for her. As if it had been incomplete without her. As if every room and every fence post and every acre had been holding its breath for 29 years, waiting for the woman who would finally make the place whole. Amelia Rose Bennett Callahan took her husband's hand and stood beside him in the fading light, and she felt for the first time in her entire life that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because someone had chosen her, because she had chosen herself first. Every time she walked back to that platform, she chose herself. Every time she stood in line and watched another man walk away, she chose herself. Every time the whispers cut, and the pity stung, and the loneliness pressed down so hard she thought it would crush her, she chose herself. And that was the truth the 9 men never understood. They thought they were rejecting her. They thought their judgment had the power to define her. They thought that walking away was a verdict, final, permanent, absolute. But Amelia knew something they didn't. Their rejection was never the end of her story. It was the road to the one person who had the wisdom to see what they were too blind to recognize. The wrong people will measure you by what you lost. The right person will recognize everything you survived. 9 men rejected Amelia Rose Bennett. But one man saw the truth. And that one choice, that single quiet, extraordinary act of recognition, changed the rest of her life. Not because he saved her, because he saw her. And being seen, truly, fully, completely seen by even one person, is worth more than the approval of every person who ever looked away. Amelia Rose Bennett was rejected 9 times. She came back 10. And on the 10th time, she didn't find a husband. She found her equal. And that made all the difference.